Hey guys, your tired teacher again, and I'm being brave. I'm recording this during the school day, during our student support time period. No one is in the classroom, and I'm hoping no one walks in because, yeah, that would totally screw up this recording. So, anyways, let's go ahead and dive into imperialism. You guys were exposed to this last year during world history. Basically, big countries taking over smaller countries and exploiting them for their natural resources and just to get territory so we look like the big bad boys around the world. That's pretty much it. But, anyways, this is American style imperialism, so it's us basically catching up to the big boys. So, you guys talked about the scramble for Africa last year. And I mean, look at this. I mean, Africa has basically been cut up by these colonial powers out in Europe, like the British, the French, the Germans, the Portuguese, Italians, Belgians, the Spanish, and the few independent areas of Africa, which would be Liberia and Abyssinia. But yeah, Africa be taken over. Same with Asia. I mean, Asia by World War I's onset, Great Britain's already carving up spots, same with France, Netherlands, Portugal, even the United States up there in the Philippines, Japan, and the parts that remain independent thanks to the open door policy and such would be China, Manchuria, Outer Mongolia, Tibet, Nepal, Bhutan, and Siam, and Japan. Because Japan will also become an imperialist power. Well, they are an imperialist power. Never mind. Okay, so here's the thing about our foreign policy back in the day. All right, we actually did kind of listen to George Washington when it came to foreign policy in the 1800s. George Washington was like, hey guys, stay the hell out of foreign affairs. And in the 1800s, we actually took this to heart. We're like, all right, we're staying the hell out of foreign affairs, especially European affairs, right? Just don't get involved in them. Don't get involved in European wars at the time. So we would actually stay true to this isolationist policy up until World War I, which, dude, after that we get involved in everything. Let's just face it. But you could make the argument that we were already starting imperialism here within our borders. So basically in the 1800s, American-style imperialism was the conquering of the West. Because were we not also conquering a weaker nation, which would be the Native American tribes? Were we also not exploiting their land and their natural resources? Dude, we were doing all of that when Manifest Destiny. Manifest Destiny is essentially American imperialism. So, I mean, yeah, going further out west, spreading our influence the further west we went. Frederick Jackson Turner even calls this, with his frontier thesis, he's like, yeah, once we had run out of frontier in America, people start freaking the hell out because this so far has been our American identity, moving out west, spreading our influence and American democracy, basically showing everybody how awesome Americans are. So when Frederick Jackson Turner is basically saying, according to the 1890 thesis, there is no more frontier. We got enough people to settle all this area. People freak the hell out. So they're like, let's go abroad. And so imperialism, official imperialism, gets kickstarted to high gear in 1890. But anyways, there's going to be a lot of people loving on imperialism at this time. I mean, conservatives are going to be like, yeah, let's go ahead and conquer some overseas territory and have ourselves a good adventure. Dude. Anyways, yeah, what we're essentially doing with imperialism is exactly the definition. It's a policy of one nation extending its authority over another through territorial acquisition and control over the government and the economy in the conquered nation. Basically, exploiting, right? Exploiting weaker nations for what they have that is valuable. These weaker nations will act as a new market for our factory-made goods and will provide said raw materials to our factories to make these goods. So, this is part of the rationale for imperialism. I mean, to gain more wealth in general. But also, we kind of have this whole thought in our head that, well, if we gain some territory too around the world, the big boys like these European imperialist nations will actually take us seriously. And it'll like propel us into the international stage. Plus, we got in the back of our heads, it's like, hey, we got to Christianize these heathens. Bruh. Yeah, missionary zeal. Anyways. So, really, it's for the prestige. It's due to racial theories like social Darwinism and economic growth because, hello, Gilded Age is happening at the same time. So, it's all of these factors combined, plus others, that America is going to now shift its interest into overseas expansion. So, remember around 1890 is also about the time we start losing interest in the West as well? Yeah, it's because we're looking abroad. So, advocates for imperialism are going to be missionaries, so hardcore Christian people wanting to spread the word to the heathens. Dude, I just can't with these missionaries. But anyways, politicians are going to be like, hell yeah, it makes America look strong. Naval strategists are going to be like, hell yeah, anything to beast, like to make the Navy like totally beast and to beef up our budget. Industrialists are like, hell yeah, new markets, new raw materials. Yes. And then journalists are be like, hey, exotic stories? Hell yes, it's going to sell some newspapers. So essentially, these are our advocates for imperialism. And I mean, let's face it, Great Britain, other countries are going to be serving the role of the ideal imperialist power, Great Britain especially. But other countries that are leading the imperialism game at that time is France, Germany, Russia, and Japan. So, imperialism kind of goes hand in hand with social Darwinism when you think about it. Because, I mean, social Darwinism was like, oh yeah, you're weak, so you're unfit kind of thing, right? Survival of the fittest. And, yeah, our buddy here, Herbert Spencer again, dude, I still want to punch him in the face. But, anyways, we apply this same ideal to the United States. It's like the United States is the fit nation. It must dominate the unfit nations, the weaker nations. So we're applying social Darwinism not only to wealthy industrialists so they could sleep at night and get away with the hell they want, but also to the United States so we could do the same thing. We could sleep at night and get away with justifying imperialism. So, people are going to believe that the U.S. had to compete with imperialistic nations for territory, or else we're going to look like the unfit nation, we're going to look like the weak nation, and we won't survive. And then here's the weird, like, marriage between social Darwinism and religion. Yeah, religion. So these missionaries like Josiah Strong are going to be like, hey, we need to convert the heathens and non-believers and civilize these native people. Good Lord. I swear, I just can't. I just can't sometimes. But it is essentially what Josiah Strong is saying. It is essentially, he, in his book, Our Country, Its Possible Future and Present, he's pretty much saying survival of the fittest applies even to religion, that Protestant Americans have these Christian duties to colonize these other lands, to spread the word, and to extend our brand of Western civilization. It is essentially, as Rudyard Kipling has said in his poem, the white man's burden. You can see the faces I'm making right now. Dude, okay. Alright, here we go. Let's do this. This is Rudyard Kipling's The White Man's Burden, so I'm just going to read part of this, man. Yeah. It's okay. Take up the white man's burden. Sent forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile to serve your captives' need. To wait in heavy harness on fluttered folk and wild. Your new caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child. Wow. You guys can take a gander at the rest of this, but Okay, let me read the second part now because this actually implies to industrialization and imperialism. Take up the white man's burden, impatience to abide, to veil the threat of terror, and check the show of pride, by open speech and simple, and 100 times made plain, to seek another's profit and work another's gain. Yep. This doesn't get any better, guys, but, yeah. Yeah, it's imperialism, and just, imperialist country is basically saying, yeah, it's a white man's burden to Christianize these heathens and to show them our brand of Western civilization, as is shown in these images here of Theodore Roosevelt taking a very highly racist caricature of an island native up the hill where the dead bodies lay to the American schoolhouse. And then we get this advertisement from Pear Soap. The first step towards lightening the white man's burden is through the virtues of cleanliness. Pear Soap is a potent factor in the brightening of the dark corners of the earth as civilization advances, while among the cultured of all nations it holds the highest place. It is the ideal toilet soap. Wow. Even advertisements like, let's make this as freaking racist as possible. And claiming that these people we're conquering are unclean and therefore uncivilized. See, even the missionary in this advertisement is offering the island native some soap. Okay. All right, let's go down to this political cartoon found in Puck magazine. It says, school begins. Uncle Sam says, now children, you got to learn these lessons whether you want to or not. But just take a look at the class ahead of you and remember that in the state, while you will feel as glad to be here as they are. Sorry, I couldn't really read the caption. I thought I had it bigger, but anyways. So look at what we have here. We have the African American child washing the windows, not even allowed to learn. We have the Native American child sitting in the very back, apart from the crowd. Again, not really allowed to learn in front of Uncle Sam the teacher. We have the Chinese child in the doorway, not even allowed inside the American school. So, Chinese exclusion, anybody? Yep. And then we've got the good children in the back here, which represent the different states of the United States, like Texas, that you see up front. And then we have our conquered territories, which is Cuba, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and the Philippines. And it looks like they are getting scolded by Uncle Sam. So, again, the white man's burden. All right. So, we actually do start acquiring territory towards imperialism back after the Civil War, actually. Secretary of State William Seward purchases Alaska from the Russians. And people were laughing at him. They're like, this is Seward's folly. This is Seward's icebox. It's a frozen wasteland. And then here comes 1890 when they discover gold. Yeah, last laugh. But yeah, for a while he took a bunch of crap for it. But anyways, it was our first deal with imperialism. Okay, our first official deal with imperialism. Let's face it, Commodore Perry had already gone to Japan with his gunboat saying, hey, trade with us. So, okay. But politicians like Theodore Roosevelt and Henry Cabot Lodge and Senator Alfred Beveridge down here are going to be like, yeah, imperialism. Let's look like a bunch of badasses. So, a lot of politicians in the Republican Party, since they are closely aligned with big business leaders, be like, yeah, let's go ahead and conquer these places, get new markets and new resources. So, they're going to endorse imperialism. And Henry Cabot Lodge and Theodore Roosevelt in particular want to endorse imperialism to expand U.S. power amongst the nations around the world. So, here we go. Senator Alfred Beveridge with this gem of a quote right here. All right. Today we are raising more than we can consume. Today we are making more than we can use. Therefore, we must find new markets for our produce, new occupation for our capital, new work for our labor. As our commerce spreads, the flag of liberty will circle the globe, and the highway of the ocean, carrying trade to all mankind, will be guarded by the guns of the Republic. And as their thunders salute the flag, benighted, rather ignorant, peoples will know that the voice of liberty is speaking at last for them, that civilization is dawning at last for them. Wow. Oh, look at the year, 1898. That is going to be the highlight of imperialism. So, let's move on to wealthy industrialists and why they like imperialism. Because, hello, look at the money. Look at the money with imports and exports. Yeah, the United States needs new markets to sell off the surplus goods. And not only factory-made goods, but farm goods as well. So, we love us some imperialism. And so does the Navy. Alfred Thayer Mahan here, in his book, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History from 1660 to 1783, captures the attention of politicians because he makes the argument that these great nations during this time period had great navies. So he kind of pitches the idea that, yeah, we need to build up our navy. This is how we're going to conquer these foreign territories across the seas. And we need to conquer small island nations to serve as refueling stations, as coaling stations for our new steel-clad battleships. So, he persuades Congress to go ahead and strike up a deal to up the Navy's budget and, to acquire these new island territories. So, who else likes acquiring new island territories, or rather the adventurous stories that we get from it? These two guys, William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer. They're kind of the robber barons of mass media and newspapers at that time, especially newspapers. They're two competing newspaper companies, the New York World and the New York Herald, or New York Journal. Yeah. And essentially, their job is to sell newspapers any means possible. So the crazier the story, the more newspapers it sells. And so stories about going to these far off places are going to be very popular and sell a lot of newspapers. So yeah, these guys are all about imperialism. So the areas that we try to conquer at first with imperialism is going to be Samoa and Hawaii. All right, Samoa. We almost go to war with Germany over Samoa in 1889, but we were able to go ahead and grab hold of this place. The real big test right here is actually acquiring Hawaii, because missionaries have already gone to Hawaii in the early 1800s, and Hawaii is really capturing our attention, especially amongst the pineapple planters and other exotic fruits and such. So there's a lot of people in those businesses going to Hawaii. And we're going to end up annexing Hawaii in 1898. See? Telling you that year is important for imperialism. How we do that is kind of shady. Queen Liliuokalani here is the last queen of Hawaii. She really doesn't like the fact that American businessmen like Sanford, Dole are kind of taking over the place. So she stands up to them, and she's going to be forced to abdicate her throne in 1894 under protest because of pressure from businessmen like Sanford Dole upon their island workers on the plantations. So, essentially, this queen was pretty much overthrown. And who ends up getting in charge of the area after that? Oh, Sanford Dole. He becomes the president of the whole Republic of Hawaii after Queen Liliuokalani is forced to abdicate, and Hawaii is annexed in 1898. Yeah, guys, Dole should sound familiar to you. Dole pineapple juice. It's still around, guys. It's that company. There you go. Imperialism. So, let's move on to some more foreign policy. All right. So we've got Blaine here, Cleveland, and Olney. So this is dealing with Latin America. So James Blaine, at the Pan American Conference, hopes to reduce tariff rates on trade, but instead, the bigger goal really is to get the hemisphere cooperating economically and politically with Latin American countries. So that's what they try to do instead. And Venezuela is going to have a boundary dispute. So President Cleveland is going to have to step in. Along with Secretary of State Richard Olney. They threatened to intervene with military force if Great Britain didn't agree to arbitrate with Venezuela. So, yeah, Great Britain is basically like, we value American friendship more than we value our dispute with Venezuela, so yes, we will agree to arbitrate. So, yeah, you can see how we're kind of like taking more of a active role around the world, especially in Latin America. It's going to keep going, for sure. Yeah, when we get to the Spanish-American War. So, Spanish-American War takes place in, guess what year, guys? 1898. So, here's some causes for the Spanish-American War. Cause number 1, the Cuban Revolt. So, Cuba was, by this time, one of the last major strongholds of the Spanish colonial days, pretty much, in the Spanish Empire. So, there are problems that have arisen between Cuba and the Spanish, which is going to capture our attention, especially when the newspapers get involved, because they're reporting stories about, General Weyler the Butcher, how he mistreats the Cuban people. And this is going to like hype us up, because what's essentially happening, guys, is cause number 2, yellow journalism. This is where you report the quote-unquote truth, but you're taking something that's true and exaggerating it in such a way to where, yeah, it's just going to be blown out of proportion. And people really didn't do fact-checking back then because, no internet. So they're going to rely on newspapers to tell the truth. And unfortunately, Pulitzer and Hearst weren't necessarily saying the whole truth. So, they take advantage of the situation. They twist the stories around and sensationalize them so that we're really invested in what's going on in Cuba so that they could, in turn, sell more newspapers. Because, after all, the American people were like, oh no, what's going to happen to Evangelina? Really? The U.S. public is going to be very sympathetic towards the Cuban women. And William Randolph Hearst is going to focus on her, Evangelina Cisneros, who is imprisoned in Havana. So people around the country are going to be like, yeah, we're petitioning for her freedom and all this. She manages to escape thanks to a correspondent by the name of Carl Decker, who, probably bribed the guards, let's just say. But the story itself is going to sell newspapers. As is this next thing, the Lome letter, cause number 3. So, here's a Spanish diplomat, Lome, and he writes a letter, basically trash-talking President William McKinley. And the letter is intercepted, and it is leaked out to William Randolph Hearst's New York Journal, and it's published. I think the British were the ones who intercepted this one. I can't remember for certain. Somebody leave in the comments. But it's one thing for a foreign person to talk crap about our president, and it's another thing for us as Americans to talk crap about our president. Yeah, we're not taking too kindly to the Lome talking crap about our president. So we're kind of outraged. And cause number 4 does not help things either. Here is the USS Maine. It is sitting outside the Havana harbor on February 15th, 1898. And lo and behold, boom, this is seriously what happens to it. Oh, what are the newspapers going to write about this? Who are they going to blame? The Spanish, of course. Because let's face it, war would sell a lot of newspapers. So, we didn't really know what happened to the USS Maine's explosion at that time. We find out, of course, that it exploded on its own. Some faulty, ship work in there. But the newspapers have already grabbed hold of this. Yellow journalism is alive and well. And they're like, yeah, it was the Spanish. Spanish did it. Crisis at hand. Spanish treachery. And then they're publishing political cartoons like this. Where you got the Spanish brute with the bloody hands standing on the graves of the USS Maine sailors, stepping on the flag, having just killed people in the background. Yeah, dude. Americans are pissed. They want war. William McKinley is not quite convinced yet, though. McKinley is kind of like, hey, let's talk this out. Let's issue an ultimatum to the Spanish. If it agrees to ceasefire in Cuba, we're good. But even though the Spanish agreed, the newspapers and Congress keep pushing McKinley to declare war. So McKinley is going to give in to the demands and offer 4 reasons for the U.S. to finally intervene in the Cuban Revolution. Number 1, put an end to the barbarities, bloodshed, starvation, and horrible miseries in Cuba. Number 2, protect the lives and property of U.S. citizens living in Cuba. It's always lives and property, guys. All right, number 3, the very serious injury to the commerce, trade, and business of our people. Again, the almighty dollar. And number 4, the constant menace to our peace arising from the disorders in Cuba. So, those are his 4 reasons. And there's also an amendment drafted called the Teller Amendment. So, we basically say, yeah, Cuba, we don't have any intention of controlling you guys once peace is restored. You guys can have your own government. We're so going to take backsies on that, guys. It's imperialism. We're not the good guy at this point in time. All right. Theodore Roosevelt's loving some Spanish-American War. Here he is charging up San Juan Hill with his Rough Riders. And, he's known for this. He was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. He quit. He joined to fight in the Spanish-American War. Becomes a badass in the process in the American people's eyes. They love him. Yeah. So, here's Theodore Roosevelt with his Rough Riders in Cuba. Looking all damn cool. Alright, meanwhile, while the Rough Riders are doing its thing on San Juan Hill, we've got U.S. forces conquering the Philippines by sea with Admiral Dewey. And at the Battle of Manila Bay, where we basically destroy the Spanish fleet, no problem. Here's a messed up thing, though, with the Philippines. We promised the Filipino people, hey, you help us fight against Spain, we get you independence. We don't actually do that in the Treaty of Paris, which ends the Spanish-American War. What we do is this instead. We recognize Cuban independence, all right. We acquire Puerto Rico and Guam from the Spanish. And, the Philippines. We promised you some independence. We're going to purchase you for $20 million from the Spanish. Yeah, we did that. So, Emilio Aguinaldo is like, whoa, hold up now. I'm going to rebel. And so he does, get some forces going. Fights off against U.S. control in the Philippines for 3 years until 1902. But yeah, he's pissed. Rightfully so. But the acquisition of the Philippines is going to be very controversial. Of course, imperialists are going to be like, yeah, let's get the Philippines in here right away. Anti-imperialists, which will be more of your progressives, are going to be like, nope, we don't need this. So, once again, who's in favor of acquisition of the Philippines? Imperialists, industrialists, missionaries, and politicians. Again, people pro-imperialism. People against the acquisition of the Philippines are anti-imperialists. So, like we said, like progressive reformers and such. William Jennings Bryan will join this list, along with Mark Twain and others. And they argue that the Philippines is already heavily populated. It's got a bunch of people there. We're going against our whole Declaration of Independence and just our ideals, really. And we think it's going to lead to political conflicts in Asia. And it's just too big of a problem to even deal with. We got problems at home. We got to fix up the abuses of corporate America and reform things. So, yeah, like we said, William Jennings Bryan, Mark Twain, gonna be anti-imperialist. So, one thing that this war did do, kind of, was actually smooth over relations between the North and the South. Yeah, we're no longer being like, hey, we hate you, kind of thing, with each other. So, we're kind of burying the hatchet here, in a way. Both sides are still kind of salty about, like, the racist thing, which, that's going to perpetuate for a long-ass time. But it kind of, like, helped unite us, in a way, which is weird. Also, William Jennings Bryan and other anti-imperialists are going to argue that the Constitution applies to the territories. Well, they are our territories now, right? So, therefore, the Constitution should apply. Imperialists are going to be like, no, they're a territory, but no constitutional rights. So leave it up to the Supreme Court. Need I remind you guys, this is the same Supreme Court that decided Plessy versus Ferguson, which is separate but equal. And this is also the same Supreme Court that said corporations are people. Should we expect anything different from this SCOTUS? No. The insular cases are pretty much going to say that constitutional rights are not automatically extended to the territories in our possession. And the power to decide whether or not they get these rights belongs to Congress. But this is the same Gilded Age Congress that was bribed incredibly, so much so that, these guys aren't about doing what's fair. Hell no, they're going to listen to big business and others that have influence. We haven't quite cleaned up politics yet, guys. That comes during the Progressive Era, and this is still pre-height of the Progressive Era. So, okay, remember how I said we were going to probably take backsies on the Teller Amendment? Here's how we do that with the Platt Amendment. We're going to require Cubans to agree to the following provisions. Never sign a treaty with a foreign power that impairs its independence. Okay, all right. Never build up an excessive public debt. You got to permit the U.S. to intervene in Cuban affairs to preserve its independence and maintain law and order. So basically, we got to let the United States be our big brother. Number 4, allow the U.S. to maintain naval bases in Cuba, including one at Guantanamo Bay. Yeah, that's when we get that one. And we would not withdraw our troops whatsoever from Cuba until they put the Platt Amendment into their constitution. So really, is Cuba treated like an independent nation? No, because we're always looking over their shoulder. So that's what the Platt Amendment essentially did. It made Cuba a protectorate of the United States, and its foreign policy is basically subject to our oversight and control. So, by this point in time in 1898, I mean, this is what we got. Uncle Sam is wondering what island territory to order next, whether it be the Puerto Rico pig, the Cuba steak, Philippines floating islands, Sandwich Islands, and whatnot. Because look at all the territory we have up until this point in 1898. We've got Hawaii, we've got Midway Island, Wake Island, Guam, Johnston Island, Palmyra Island, Samoa, Philippines, Puerto Rico. Yeah, we got some territory. So, really, I mean, anti-imperialists kind of see it like this. It's like Uncle Sam with a cannon strapped to his back that wealthy industrialists are keeping him bound by. And meanwhile, the United States in the background, with the Statue of Liberty, is being forced into confinement. I think Marcano was Secretary of State at that time, if I'm not mistaken. And again, anti-imperialists are going to be like, look at this scene right here. Uncle Sam can't handle all of these kids that he got from imperialism, like Puerto Rico, the Philippines, Cuba, and Hawaii making a mess right there. Because really, we can't even handle our problems at home. Civilization begins at home, after all. And how we are at home, well, we're not very civilized. Here we are massacring Native Americans and African Americans all through the South with lynchings. So, we ought to take care of our business, shouldn't we? Before messing with acquiring the Philippines. So, so much shade in that political cartoon. I love it. All right. So, we try to venture out into Asia as well. Well, besides the Philippines, all right? But there's already a thing going on. We already have the spheres of influence being set up. Because, I mean, look at this. You can see the areas that Russia controls, Japan, Germany, Britain, and France. So, with the spheres of influence, these countries could dominate the trade and investment within their sphere. They basically got total control, right? And, you know, there are much rebellions happening at this time to fight off foreign influence, like the Boxer Rebellion. U.S. troops actually go march into Peking, which Beijing at the time, to crush this Boxer Rebellion because, we want to protect our American lives and property. But the Boxers are like, we just don't like these foreign influences and settlements, and they're going to go after Christian missionaries. All right. So the big thing that we do with China, though, is the open door policy. Because we don't want to be shut out thanks to these spheres of influence. So we're going to try to act like the good guy in this sense, but really, come on now. We just don't want to get shut out. So, John Hay is Secretary of State, and he's going to come up with the open door notes, where he's basically like, with this open door policy, all nations should have equal trading privileges with China. And then in the second round of open door notes, he further explains it. Preserve China's territorial integrity and safeguard the equal and impartial trade with all parts of the Chinese empire. So what we're doing is stopping these foreign nations from carving up China and kind of putting our foot down with that. Again, we just don't want to get shut out of trade. Seriously. So Japan is going to enter the imperialist world stage. A little late, albeit, but they'd still do it. And it's because they've been rapidly industrializing, thanks to us establishing our trade with them early on with, there he is, Commodore Perry again, right? In 1853. So Japan has been getting a bunch of our industrialized goods and industrializing themselves. So Japan is going to become an influential imperialist power in the area with the Sino-Japanese War with Russia. Well, with China, and then the Russo-Japanese War with Russia. So Theodore Roosevelt steps in for the Russo-Japanese War and tries to mediate some peace. Ends up winning the Nobel Peace Prize in the process. But yeah, Japan is definitely into imperialism, so it needs those natural resources to help expand its empire. And that, of course, is going to rear its ugly head when we get into World War II. But all right, there is some friction with the U.S. and Japan concerning California immigration and such. There's also discrimination against Japanese Americans. It wasn't just the Chinese guys that it was discriminated against. It was Japanese as well. So the Gentleman's Agreement is formally established in 1908, and Japan secretly agrees to restrict immigration of Japanese workers to the United States. And in return, Roosevelt's going to be like, hey, California, get rid of your discriminatory laws against the Japanese. So what we also have, guys, is Roosevelt wanting to show off our great white fleet of ships around the world. And there we are, sailing around the world, showing off our ride. Okay. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Roosevelt's foreign policy, which is otherwise known as big stick diplomacy. So, Theodore Roosevelt, with that West African proverb, speak softly and carry a big stick and you will go far. This is kind of like how he treats foreign policy. He's going to take more of a forceful approach with it than his predecessors. And he views the United States as a regional superpower that would keep Europeans out and keep peace throughout the Americas. So he's going to act as like the big policeman of the Western Hemisphere as well. So it's going to be a very aggressive foreign policy. And this is definitely a departure from his side as a progressive president, is it not? He is a very big imperialist. So he's going to get involved in all kinds of Latin American affairs, like the Venezuela affair. There's going to be a civil war in Venezuela, and British, Germans, and Italian citizens' properties were damaged. European nations are going to be like, hey, we want retribution. They don't get any, so they're really pissed at Venezuela. They send ships to blockade the ports. Roosevelt's going to be like, big policeman of the world. He's going to act as a mediator to settle disputes. And so the United States is officially stepping in again. Roosevelt's going to go a step further and go beyond the Monroe Doctrine and issue out the Roosevelt Corollary, which basically says, the U.S. is going to intervene whenever stability in Latin America was in question. So that's kind of up to interpretation, right? Essentially, he's opening the door to intervene whenever the hell he feels he should. So for the next 20 years, presidents are going to use that Roosevelt Corollary to justify sending forces to basically everywhere in Latin America. Haiti, Honduras, Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, and Latin America is going to hate us for it. Because we're forever meddling in their freaking business. They hate it so much. So, dude, especially when we get involved in the Panama Canal. Yeah, Colombia's not going to like us. So here's the thing about the Panama Canal. All right, you see how long it takes to travel from like the east coast of the United States to the west coast of the United States? 1,500 miles. Wouldn't it be so much easier if we were to carve out a canal right there in the middle at the skinniest point of Central America, which is Panama? The French actually, find a viable route, and they ask Colombia for permission to dig through Panama, because at that time, Panama belonged to Colombia. And so the French construction on the canal is going to begin in 1882, thanks to Colombia granting them permission. But there's a bunch of yellow fever going around because, come on, it's swampy marshland, mosquitoes. So President Roosevelt is going to be like, all right, French, we're going to buy you guys out because we want in on this canal business. But the Colombians are like, hey, dude, we want a cut of our own. he feels that the Colombian price is too high. So he's essentially saying, nah, buddy, we're not going to give you 40 million to gain building rights to the Panama Canal. So he pushes Colombia aside, and instead what we do is we approach Panama themselves. And we're going to be like, hey, Panama, you want some independence? Oh, let us build this canal. We hook you up. So, yeah, the Panamanian Revolution happens in 1903. And the first act that the Panamanian government signed is the Hay-Bona Varia treaty that gives the U.S. long-term control over the Canal Zone. We give it back to them in the year 2000, I want to say, or 1999. But yeah, we held on to it for a long-ass time. And so the Hay-Pauncefote Treaty is going to nullify the earlier treaty that stated that any canal in Central America was to be under joint British-U.S. control. So we could go ahead and dig the canal without any British involvement. And that's what we do. Construction on the canal is going to begin on our part in 1904. Remember, the French were building in 1880, and 20,000 of their workers died from diseases like malaria and yellow fever, especially yellow fever. So it's going to be like about 48 miles by the time it's said and done, and completed in 1914. It's a massive freaking undertaking, but the problem still remains. Mosquitoes. So we need to do some research on how to combat against yellow fever. So here's your local history alert, guys. William Gorgas, right here. He's an American doctor and chief sanitary officer at the Panama Canal Zone. He was here in Brownsville studying yellow fever at Fort Brown. He even got yellow fever himself and survived. So yeah, local history. But we got Walter Reed and Carlos Finley here as well, providing some valuable insight into yellow fever. And the three forces combined are going to go ahead and combat this problem. So, yeah, this canal is going to be built with a series of locks, which is pretty freaking impressive. I mean, look at that thing. I mean, massive steel gates that are going to lock a ship in place to where you raise the water level and lower it because there's varying degrees of elevation. So, the Canal Zone, like we were saying, is completed in 1914. And we have long-term control of it until President Carter in the 70s goes ahead and signs the Torrijos-Carter Treaty, which returns the Panama Canal control back to Panama on December 31st, 1999. So, beyond that, other ventures into imperialism that we have is the Virgin Islands. We buy these in 1917 to act as a refueling station for merchant and warships. So that is Theodore Roosevelt's brand of imperialism. Taft is going to be a little bit different with dollar diplomacy. He's not very big stick like Roosevelt and is not as forceful, but, he is a little bit expansionist, but not quite. But he really depends more on investors' dollars than Navy battleships. So he's going to try to promote trade in the area and American business abroad. So believes that private American financial investment in China and in Central America is going to lead to greater stability in those areas and at the same time promote U.S. business. So thus dollar diplomacy. So in order to protect these investments, the troops intervene whenever needed, like in Nicaragua in 1911, when they're experiencing financial difficulties. And so he sends the troops in 1912 when Civil War actually breaks out. And they're going to remain there until 1933. And then we got Henry Cabot Lodge stepping in as well with the Lodge Corollary, where it's another extension to the Monroe Doctrine. And it states that non-European powers would be excluded from owning territory in Western Hemisphere. Taft doesn't really like this, but yeah, there we go. That is dollar diplomacy. Next up, moral diplomacy. And it's kind of funny with Wilson because he hates imperialism, yet he's probably like one of the most imperialist presidents ever. So, yeah, he doesn't like getting involved in foreign affairs, but yet he gets involved in so many freaking foreign affairs. He wants to actually try to right the past wrongs that we did to the Philippines, to Puerto Rico, and with the Panama Canal. So he tries to do that with the Jones Act, where he's going to grant full territorial status to the Philippines, universal male suffrage, and promise them independence as soon as they get a stable government. That will happen after World War II in 1945. We'll further explain this later. Puerto Rico, in 1917, is granted U.S. citizenship to all inhabitants and limited self-government. And then the Panama Canal. Wilson is going to get Congress to repeal the act that says that U.S. ships can go for free, which pleases the British because they thought it was unfair that we were exempt from paying the toll charges at the Panama Canal Zone. But really, where Wilson gets involved with imperialism is going to be Mexico. Basically Latin America, but Mexico. All right. So, Wilson is going to use the troops like crazy in Latin America. He keeps the troops in Nicaragua, sends troops to Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and argues it's necessary to maintain the stability in the region and to protect the Panama Canal. But when it comes to Mexico, Mexico's going through its revolution at this time. And the second guy in charge is General Huerta right here, who he feels is a military dictator. And rightfully so, he kind of is. So he's going to ask for an arms embargo against the Mexican government, and he's going to send the Navy to blockade the port of Veracruz and occupy Veracruz until the after the Tampico incident that happens. So the U.S. is basically almost headed to war with Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. Yeah, we're just we're almost headed to war with Argentina, but Brazil and Chile are gonna be like, whoa, let's go ahead and mediate this dispute. So for local history for you guys, you see Carranza right there, which is leader number 3, which Wilson actually does like this dude. He is there taking a picture on the old bridge in Brownsville. So Brownsville history. People who do not like Carranza are people like Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata. So when Huerta falls from power and Carranza takes over, it was supposed to be, just temporary. Carranza was supposed to have free elections after that, and he didn't. So Pancho Villa is going to be like, okay, screw you, dude. I'm going to attack border towns along the Texas and New Mexico border, killing residents on both sides, and in order to piss off Wilson. So that Wilson goes after Carranza and is like, hey, keep your bro in check. Carranza can't. So Wilson's going to be like, all right, I'm going to send in Blackjack Pershing right here. Well, General John J. Blackjack Pershing. To go ahead and pursue Pancho Villa in Mexico. Yeah, we straight up marched the troops across the border. Carranza's going to be like, what the hell, dude? No, don't do that. He's going to protest this. So now there's growing possibility that the U.S. is going to go into war with Mexico now. But World War I. And so Wilson has to withdraw Pershing and his troops from Mexico so that we could fight over there in World War I. So there you go, guys. I know this is like freaking crazy with imperialism, but yeah, this is our take on U.S. imperialism. And that's why I switched up the chapters on you guys, because imperialism actually does a very good job into springboarding into World War I, because after all, one of our main causes for World War I is just that, imperialism. So, yeah, guys, I hope you kept up with me and enjoyed this one. Yeah, bro, imperialism. But all right, I will catch you guys later with the next one, which will be World War I. Bye, guys.